Imagine a single company so powerful that kings feared it, armies worked for it, and nations traded under its flag. A company worth more than Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft combined. Now imagine, it was founded 400 years ago. For centuries ago, long before Wall Street or Silicon Valley, a small European republic engineered a financial weapon that changed the world forever. It didn't build castles, it built markets. It didn't conquer land, it conquered trade. And that weapon was the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. To understand how this quiet Dutch republic became the center of global capitalism, we have to start in 1580, when something extraordinary shook Europe. Spain swallowed Portugal in a political merger called the Iberian Union. Overnight, two superpowers fused into one empire, ruling oceans from Asia to the Americas. For the Dutch, who were still fighting for independence from Spain, this was terrifying. Their enemy had just become twice as strong. But instead of matching Spanish cannons with more cannons, they fought back with an idea: private capital. By 1602, 7 independent trading ventures combined their fleets, warehouses, and ambitions into a single corporation. One that would carry the Republic's flag but move like a sovereign power. The world had never seen anything like it. They called it the Verenigde Oostindische Company, the Dutch East India Company. At first glance, it seemed like just another merchant venture. Ships hauling spices, silk, and porcelain from Asia. But hidden beneath those decks was a revolutionary design. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens could invest in global trade. Anyone with money could buy a share of a colonial empire and earn profits from half a world away. That simple innovation, public investment in exploration, cracked open the door to modern capitalism. The VOC's founders knew what they were doing. Their company had its own warships, private armies, and forts scattered across Asia and Africa, could sign treaties, wage wars, and even govern territories. It didn't answer to a king. It answered to its shareholders. And those shareholders? They included some of Europe's most strategic minds, and one family whose name would quietly shape global power for centuries. The House of Orange, the silent patrons. At that time, the House of Orange was a noble line without a kingdom. They carried prestige but no throne, heritage but no land to tax. As monarchies fought and fell around them, the Oranges realized that crowns could fade, but capital could last. So they did what the old nobles refused to do. They invested. They helped bankroll the VOC and tied their future to this new corporate engine. In a republic run by merchants, money replaced bloodlines. Wealth became the new weapon of dynasty. Through this partnership, the VOC gained legitimacy, and the House of Orange gained power, not through divine right, but through dividends. The family's influence grew so deep that later generations, William IV and V, would sit as high-ranking governors or stadholders, overseeing both the VOC and its sister venture, the West India Company. By then, they weren't just nobles. They were financiers of an empire that ruled by spreadsheet and sword alike. The corporate empire. At its peak, the VOC looked less like a company and more like a floating kingdom. It employed over 50,000 people, maintained more than 150 merchant ships, and commanded a private army of 10,000 soldiers. It built forts from the Persian Gulf to Japan, and each carried not a royal crest but a corporate seal. The VOC printed its own share certificates, stamped, signed, traded on Amsterdam's bustling exchange. Ownership became portable. A man could sell his slice of empire without royal permission, without bloodline, without ceremony. That single leap, the idea that wealth could move freely, set the foundation for every stock exchange that followed. In 1609, they opened their first major Asian base on the island of Java. Within a decade, Dutch troops seized the city of Jayakarta, renamed it Batavia, and turned it into the beating heart of a corporate empire. For 300 years, Batavia would serve as the VOC's capital, the command post of a company richer than kingdoms. The wealth was staggering. Adjusted for modern value, the VOC reached a market capitalization of nearly $8 trillion. To put that in perspective, the biggest company in the world today is worth barely half of that. But this wasn't just numbers on parchment, it was global power in motion. Fleets leaving Dutch harbors carried more than cargo. They carried a new economic order, the human cost. for every shareholder counting profits. There were thousands of sailors, soldiers, and craftsmen living and dying for the company's dream. More than 1 million people sailed east under the VOC banner, building ports, fighting rivals, and enforcing monopoly trade. It was ambition powered by human endurance and sometimes by cruelty. But behind the noise of cannons and coins, the VOC's success rested on three foundations. 1. A powerful state charter that gave it near-royal authority. 2. A network of Amsterdam's financial elite, keeping capital flowing. 3. And the strategic blessing of the House of Orange, turning commerce into statecraft. The Dutch East India Company didn't just expand markets. It rewired the relationship between money and power. It proved that empires no longer needed kings to rule the world. They just needed investors. But how exactly did the Dutch transform simple trade into the architecture of global finance? How did a merchant fleet give birth to the modern stock market? And who truly pulled the strings behind it all? Let's find out in part 2. What if I told you that Wall Street wasn't born in America, but in a tiny canal city where merchants turned paper into power and wealth into empires? In 1602, something extraordinary happened in the Netherlands, an experiment that would change how money moved forever. The Dutch East India Company, or VOC, decided it couldn't grow alone. It needed ships, men, and endless capital. But instead of begging kings or borrowing from nobles, the company tried something no one had ever dared before. It asked the public to invest. And so, for the first time in human history, an initial public offering, an IPO, took place. Ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, and blacksmiths were suddenly part of a global adventure. For a few coins, they could own a piece of a company that ruled the seas. It was the dawn of a new kind of empire, one funded by ambition instead of aristocracy. That simple act transformed trade into finance. Amsterdam became the new capital of global money. The VOC's shares became the world's hottest ticket. Crowds gathered outside the exchange house, speculators shouted prices, and the first organized market was born, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. It was a revolution. For centuries, wealth had been tied to soil, gold, or crowns. But now it could be printed on paper, bought, sold, and traded in seconds. The merchants who designed the system had no idea they were creating the DNA of modern capitalism. The magic of the share. To understand why this was so revolutionary, imagine living in the 1600s. The oceans were dangerous. Ships vanished in storms or were swallowed by pirates. In the old world, if your ship sank, you lost everything. But the Dutch came up with a miracle idea: limited liability. It meant investors could lose only what they invested, nothing more. Their homes and savings were safe. For the first time, risk had a safety net. That single law unlocked human confidence. Suddenly, anyone could take part in massive ventures without the fear of total ruin. And with that confidence came something even more powerful: FOMO, the fear of missing out. People rushed to buy VOC shares. From an initial value of 100, the price soared tenfold by the early 1700s. A merchant who invested early could retire a legend. But the VOC's success didn't come from luck. It came from an invisible architecture, a system carefully built by both merchants and monarchs. The invisible hand, the House of Orange. Behind the booming markets and rising fortunes, a quiet power was watching: the House of Orange Nassau. They weren't kings, but they understood something kings rarely did: that money could outlive crowns. The Oranges didn't command armies the way Spain or France did. They commanded capital. Their investments in the VOC weren't just about profit. They were about survival. By aligning themselves with the merchants, they made sure the Republic's economy and their dynasty's future were tied together. Decades later, when William IV and William V became stadholders, they weren't ruling kingdoms. They were overseeing corporations. The VOC and its twin, the West India Company, became their instruments of soft power. The Dutch Republic was becoming the first hybrid of its kind, a corporate state. Empire by ledger. From the 1600s to the 1700s, the VOC expanded its reach across Asia. The ships carried not just goods, but authority. It signed treaties with sultans, toppled local rulers, and established forts. But unlike monarchs who demanded loyalty, the VOC demanded profit. It measured its success not in land conquered but in dividends paid. This was a new form of power, invisible, efficient, and endless. Yet, even as it built empires overseas, the VOC built something far more lasting at home: the world's first financial ecosystem. Banks in Amsterdam developed new tools to handle the flood of capital: credit systems, transferable shares, futures, and options. Traders bet on prices months before ships returned. They invented derivatives centuries before Wall Street. The Dutch turned trade into mathematics. Amsterdam became the financial nerve center of the world, the blueprint for London, New York, and every exchange that followed. The spark that crossed the sea. But the story didn't stay in the Netherlands. In 1688, Europe was in crisis. England's King James II had lost his people's trust. Parliament was desperate to find a Protestant ruler who could restore order. Their answer came from the Dutch Republic. His name was William of Orange, the same dynasty tied to the VOC. William landed in England with soldiers, financiers, and a new philosophy: the belief that markets could fund power more efficiently than monarchs ever could. That moment, known as the Glorious Revolution, changed England forever. Under William and his wife, Queen Mary II, England adopted Dutch financial wisdom. The Bank of England was created. Government bonds were introduced. Wars were now financed not by treasure chests, but by investors. This wasn't just politics, it was a financial revolution. From that point on, money became the new crown, the new world connection. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Dutch ships had already carried their ideas to the New World. In 1609, a VOC vessel arrived at a harbor that would one day become New York City. A few years later, the Dutch West India Company founded New Amsterdam at the tip of Manhattan. It wasn't just a colony. It was a prototype, a city built around contracts, trade, and credit. When the British took over in 1664, they didn't erase the Dutch foundation, they copied it. The legal structures, the finance systems, even the obsession with trade all remained. That Dutch DNA quietly shaped New York's destiny. Over time, it evolved into Wall Street, the spiritual descendant of Amsterdam's exchange. The VOC's rise looked unstoppable, but behind its golden sails, corruption, greed, and violence began to tear it apart. The same machine that built global capitalism would soon eat itself alive. Let's uncover the dark side of the world's first megacorporation in Part 3. Every empire that rises on greed eventually meets the same fate. It starts to devour itself. At its peak, the Dutch East India Company was worth more than any company in history, even by today's standards. Adjusted for inflation, its value would exceed $8 trillion, more than Apple, Amazon, and Google combined. It had its own army, its own navy, its own currency, and even the right to wage war. It wasn't just a company. It was a state within a state, the first true corporate empire. But behind the shimmering coins and silken sails, the VOC's heart had begun to rot. The price of power. The company's success had created monsters, men who treated the seas as their playgrounds and nations as their chessboards. They weren't explorers anymore, they were conquerors. In Asia, VOC officers became kings in everything but name. They collected taxes, commanded soldiers, and executed anyone who stood in their way. The pursuit of profit turned into a hunger for absolute power. And power, as always, came with blood. The Spice Islands Massacre. In 1621, Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, one of the VOC's most ruthless governors, arrived on the Banda Islands, the only place in the world where nutmeg grew. Nutmeg was worth more than gold in Europe. Control of Banda meant control of the spice trade, but the islanders refused to sell exclusively to the VOC. Cohen's response was brutality on a scale that shocked even his contemporaries. He ordered the massacre of almost the entire Banda population. Thousands killed, villages burned, survivors enslaved. After the bloodshed, Dutch planters took over the empty land, forcing imported slaves to work under armed guards. The VOC had secured its monopoly, but at the cost of its soul, the golden chains. By the late 1600s, the company's wealth flowed endlessly back to Amsterdam. But that success hid a dangerous truth. It was built on violence, corruption, and exploitation. Ships returned heavy with spices, silk, and silver, yet the human cost was invisible. In Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, slaves labored under a merciless sun to build the VOC's strongholds. In India and Ceylon, merchants were bullied into submission. In South Africa, indigenous people were displaced to make way for company settlers. The VOC had become a global spiderweb stretching across continents, sucking wealth from colonies and spinning it into the ledgers of Dutch investors. But even spiders can choke on their own web, the rotten core. By the early 1700s, corruption had become routine. VOC officers demanded bribes for trade licenses. Governors smuggled goods on company ships. Admirals pocketed profits meant for shareholders. The board in Amsterdam, known as the Heren 17 or Lord 17, turned a blind eye. As long as dividends flowed, they ignored the decay beneath. But the cracks were growing. Expenses skyrocketed, ships sank, wars drained the treasury. Yet the VOC kept paying high dividends to maintain its image of success. It began borrowing to pay shareholders, the classic mark of a collapsing empire. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern we see centuries later in every major financial crash. The VOC had invented modern capitalism, and now it was about to invent its first collapse. The ghosts of empire. Outside the company's marble offices, the world was changing fast. Britain was rising. France was industrializing. Global competition was tightening. And the once mighty Dutch Republic, the merchant empire that had ruled the seas, was now being outpaced. The VOC's monopoly, once unbreakable, was cracking under pressure. Smugglers and rival companies, British, French, Danish, began stealing its routes. Pirates raided its ships. Local kingdoms in Asia resisted its control. But perhaps the greatest threat wasn't external at all. It was internal. The whispers in Amsterdam. By the mid-1700s, Amsterdam's stock market was no longer a symbol of progress. It was a mirror of greed. Speculation replaced strategy. Investors gambled on rumors, not trade. The same city that had once birthed financial wisdom now danced to the rhythm of manipulation and deceit. Meanwhile, the VOC's leadership became a revolving door of politicians and aristocrats, men who knew nothing about trade but everything about extracting wealth. The company's founding spirit, adventure, innovation, and shared prosperity had turned into arrogance and self-preservation. The House of Orange, still connected to the company, could no longer hide the stench of decay. The collapse. By the late 1700s, the inevitable happened. The VOC's debts outgrew its profits. Its ships were rotting, its colonies rebelling, and its officers drowning in scandal. In 1799, after nearly 2 centuries of dominance, the Dutch government finally dissolved the company. The world's first multinational corporation was dead. Its territories were taken over by the Dutch crown, and its once proud emblem, the entwined letters VOC, faded into history. But though the company vanished, its spirit didn't die. It had already changed the world too deeply. The legacy of the machine. The VOC's rise and fall left behind a paradox. It had shown humanity how to organize capital, manage risk, and build global trade. But it had also shown how easily profit can corrupt purpose. Every modern corporation, from oil giants to tech empires, still walks in its shadow. The stock markets of London, New York, and Tokyo all trace their roots back to that small Amsterdam exchange where the VOC sold its first shares. The company that began with a dream of spices ended up seasoning the entire planet's economy. But here's the twist. Even after its death, the VOC's fingerprints didn't disappear. They live on in modern corporate empires, legal systems, and family dynasties that still control global capital today. The VOC may have fallen, but its ghost still rules the world. Let's uncover that hidden legacy in Part 4, the empire that never died. Some empires fall, but others simply change their shape. The VOC may have vanished from history books, yet its spirit still lives in every boardroom, every stock market, and every fortune that moves the world. When the Dutch East India Company was dissolved in 1799, most people believed its story had ended. But in truth, the VOC didn't die. It evolved. The company's structures, its methods, even its way of thinking, all became the foundation stones of the modern world. And if you look closely, you can still trace its fingerprints everywhere. The birth of corporate power. The VOC had invented more than trade. It had invented a new form of power, corporate power. Unlike kings or empires, this power didn't need armies to rule. It ruled through contracts, shares, and balance sheets. When the Dutch government took over the VOC's assets, It didn't dismantle the system, it preserved it. The ports, laws, and institutions that the VOC built became the backbone of the Dutch economy. And soon, other nations followed the blueprint. The British East India Company, the French Compagnie des Indes, even the early American trading corporations, all copied VOC's model of centralized control and public investment. From the ashes of the VOC rose the idea that a company could be immortal, that it could live beyond the lives of its founders, adapting, merging, and multiplying. And that idea became the seed of the modern multinational corporation, the DNA of modern capitalism. Every time a new company issues stock, it's echoing that moment in 1602 when the VOC first invited ordinary people to invest. Every time investors track dividends, speculate on prices, or trade futures, they're using tools born in the VOC's Amsterdam exchange. The world's biggest stock markets, from London to New York, from Tokyo to Hong Kong, are all children of that one experiment. Even the language of capitalism, shareholder value, limited liability, joint stock company, came from that Dutch innovation. But here's the twist. The VOC didn't just shape the way we make money. It shaped the way we think about money. It taught humanity that wealth isn't only physical. It can be imagined, represented, and multiplied on paper. That was the birth of financial abstraction, the idea that value could be detached from reality and traded like a dream. It's the same logic that fuels cryptocurrency markets today, 400 years later. The hidden dynasties. But what happened to the men behind the VOC? The merchants, financiers, and dynasties who once pulled its strings. They didn't vanish. They evolved with the system they built. The old merchant families of Amsterdam and The Hague quietly merged into Europe's new banking elite. Some of their descendants helped found or finance the great banking houses of the 19th century, names that still dominate global finance today. Through marriages, partnerships, and investments, their influence seeped into London, Paris, and New York. Even the House of Orange-Nassau, the Dutch royal family tied to the VOC's birth, continued to build its wealth through corporate holdings and global finance. It's ironic, the company that once funded a dynasty ended up creating a dynasty of wealth itself. If you trace the flows of capital from the spice trade to the modern stock market, you'll find the same pattern repeating, old money mutating, adapting, and quietly shaping the future. From Batavia to big tech, today's global corporations, Amazon, Apple, Exxon, and the rest, owe more than just a nod to the VOC. Like the VOC, they control global supply chains. Like the VOC, they operate across borders, often with more power than some governments. And like the VOC, they face the same moral dilemma. How much is too much? The VOC taught the world how to scale wealth, but it also taught how easily that wealth can overshadow humanity. The line between progress and exploitation remains as thin today as it was in the Banda Islands 400 years ago. In many ways, our world is still living in the VOC's shadow, an invisible empire ruled not by kings, but by corporations. The modern corporate republic. If the VOC was the first multinational, the Dutch Republic was the first experiment in a corporate democracy, a state run on profit and trade rather than divine right. That experiment has quietly become the global norm. Today, nations compete for corporate loyalty, the same way the VOC's governors once competed for trade routes. Policies are written to attract capital, not citizens. And the modern CEO wields influence once reserved for emperors. We call it globalization, but perhaps it's just the VOC reborn under a new name. The unseen legacy. Walk through Amsterdam's canals today, and you'll still see the old VOC warehouses, their stones darkened by centuries, their windows facing the same wind that once carried ships across the world. To tourists, they're relics. But to historians, they're reminders. They remind us that the modern world, our banks, our trade systems, our corporations, were all born from one dangerous idea: that profit could be organized, scaled, and sustained beyond morality. The VOC showed what humanity could achieve when it mastered finance, and what it could destroy when it lost its soul. A ghost that still whispers. The VOC may have vanished 2 centuries ago, but its ghost still whispers through the algorithms of stock exchanges, the corridors of multinational headquarters, and the halls of government power. Every trade, every merger, every boom and bust, they all carry echoes of that first voyage from Amsterdam to the East. The company's name may be gone, but its essence, ambition without borders, still defines us. Final reflection. So next time you watch a rocket launch funded by private investors or read about a trillion-dollar tech company shaping global politics, remember this: it all began with wooden ships and parchment shares, in a small republic where merchants dared to think bigger than kings. The Dutch East India Company didn't just build an empire. It built the idea of empire itself, one that no revolution has ever truly overthrown. Because in the end, the VOC never died. It just learned to hide behind a logo. So, do we still control capitalism? Or has capitalism, since the days of the VOC, learned to control us? Tell me in the comments, is the world today freer than it was under the VOC, or just better disguised?